Welcome to News with a View, hosted by me, John A. Costa. This will be episode 9. It is January 16th, 2026. Today's show is basically going to be on the 10th Amendment. I've discussed this before, and I said I would jump into it at a later date. The day has arrived. And this is basically due to Attorney General Keith Ellison out of Minnesota attempting to use language inside the 10th Amendment to bar President Trump from taking action in that state. Interesting because in the 10th Amendment, okay, 10th Amendment really reserves to the states or the people any powers not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited to the states. And it defines the boundaries of federal power, ensuring states retain significant autonomy. Where the problem with states have had and have challenged and won in certain cases the right to not to follow federal laws. It's an interesting concept. It was the last amendment in the original Bill of Rights, and it was really rushed through. And what the 10th Amendment really did was it was an anti-federalist statement, meaning that at the time of the founding of this nation, states wanted autonomy. They said, listen, we believe there should be a federal government, and we need a centralized government, but we're afraid that they'll garnish too much power and thus will extend through the states and we lose our power. So they came up with the 10th Amendment. And really what it meant was that the federal government, in essence, couldn't dictate to a state really what they could do. But in the same token, it was understood under Article 6 of the Constitution, Clause 2, I'm sorry, I had my notes and I got it scattered around here. But it was Article 6, that creates the supremacy laws. And, the supremacy clause, meaning that all states must follow the laws of the Constitution and federal government. So you have people saying, do states have to follow federal laws? The short answer is yes. States are required to follow federal law due to the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution, which establishes federal law as the supreme law of the land. I've said before how you have to think of it as a pyramid. Federal law, then state law, county laws, and so forth. But they flow down. Federal law being the supreme law. A state law can't negate a federal law. Just like a county law can't negate a state law. These are fundamental principles of the 10th Amendment. The Supreme Clause is found in Article 4, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution. It states that the Constitution, federal laws made pursuant to it, and treaties made under the authority of the United States constitutes the supreme law of the land. This means when state laws conflict with federal laws, federal law takes precedent, and states must comply with them. Federal law, the precedent, federal laws enacted within the Constitution authorizes the federal government to take priority over state laws. This ensures uniformity across the country while allowing states to govern their own affairs within their jurisdiction. So, again, if the Constitution does not take up a state argument on something, I'm going to use something that was just real relevant. I know it's going to bother some people, but Roe v. Wade. Inside the Constitution, there was no protection for abortion. Even though the Supreme Court had ruled that it did fall under a protection of the Constitution in a Privacy Act. It was terrible law, horrible, horrible law, and it got reversed. So it didn't say that you couldn't be protected under the federal government for abortions, but each state had the right then to decide on whether their citizens could obtain an abortion. And some states made the laws very lax, and some states outright outlawed it. That is invoking the 10th Amendment, saying, we're taking our hands off this, the federal government. Not ours to decide. Each state can decide. So that is the 10th Amendment in power in this instance, where people have taken it, and I say people, I mean lawsuits, have taken it to say that states can pick and choose what federal laws they wish to abide by. No, 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 no. That's not what the 10th Amendment says. Under the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution, all states must comply with federal law. Now, where it came into a problem was there's nothing in there to say how the government forces a state, or how the federal government really, it can't force a state to do it. You can't send federal troops in. So what you can do is hold back money. And that is allowed under the Constitution. So the 10th Amendment, where the tensions get between state and federal. Commandeering. A point of conflict is when Congress tries to force state governments to enforce federal regulations, e.g., ordering states to run background checks or enact specific laws, which the Supreme Court has ruled violates the 10th Amendment by commandeering state resources. So it's federal versus state regulations. The disputes arise when federal standards like environmental or food safety are stricter or different from state ones, prompting questions about whether the federal government is overstepping reserved state powers or simply exercising constitutional authority. Under the Supremacy Clause, means that if a state law conflicts with a federal law, the federal law generally wins. Generally. What is happening in Minnesota is the Attorney General Ellison is saying that Trump trying to send in troops there for protection of property isn't necessary. Or they don't have to follow the government law on protection of property and federal personnel. They're very wrong in that instance because the presidents already have done it, and without question. The federal government does, like I said, has the incentive compliance by withholding federal funds from states that do not adhere to federal law. That was tried in, Trump tried to do that in California when he was, during his first election, his first term, sorry. And that really didn't work because he was too vague on, what was going on. He was disputing their land management and things of that nature, and there was no law on that, and they were doing what the state wanted to do with their environment. So the conflict, the court said, no, you can't withhold money for that. Again, the states have the power to create their own laws. They must comply with federal laws due to the Supremacy Clause. Again, remember, like I said, this is a very tricky amendment. And in a couple of my podcasts, maybe a dozen of them, I stated that the 10th Amendment, pesky little 10th Amendment, gets in the way of a lot of things. But it's really there to protect the citizens of a state from an overbearing federal government. And when there's a real conflict, the federal government usually wins on that. But there have been instances where they have lost. And some of these ones that have come up have really, the last one, like I think in New York, was really bad law by the Supreme Court at the time. Just plain bad law. So, the bottom line is what's going on in Minnesota by this Attorney General Ellison. This will go right through the Supreme Court. This will be a shadow docket right up to the top. And he will lose. Because in their state constitution, they state that the Constitution provides protection of all those persons, citizens, residency, visitors that come into the state. And that in their Constitution, the state will adhere to federal law. Now, it doesn't mean the state can't challenge the federal law. But in this case, where they're not protecting federal troops and they're not providing federal protection of federal property, they're in violation. And if they choose not to, if there's a conflict, then the president can order National Guard troops in. Or, in extreme cases, which has been done, federal troops in to provide that protection. The president can also order, at that point, limited martial law, saying if the state won't protect the federal troops, the federal agents there and property, and the people who are protesting are a danger to not only other citizens, the ICE agents, and themselves, martial law can be called until it is subdued, not suppressed, but subdued. It's a big meaning, big difference. I think the rhetoric that came from Walz on saying he was going to order state troops against actions of the federal agents is the definition of insurrection. The Attorney General in Philadelphia had threatened to do that too, but the Attorney General of the state has not said anything on the subject, because really it has not happened. Just because someone, says, "Hey, I'm going to take this action if they do it," or "I may take this action if they do it." Yeah, all right. You can't do anything until the deed is actually done. So, some of these attorney generals, some of these governors think that because the Supreme Court had said Trump couldn't move troops into certain areas, was because those states had proven that, hey, we're providing protection, we're doing this, we're actively engaged in it. I think in Minnesota's case, they're in for a rude awakening. These aren't peaceful protests. These are people that are engaged by their own local government to act in a manner that puts the lives in jeopardy of federal agents. The 10th Amendment, where people scream, no, that's the states don't have to follow federal laws. Yeah, they do. They do. And again, where the 10th Amendment can conflict with existing laws, like I said, environmental. If the federal government's rules on environmentals say you must keep within this certain boundaries, and a state goes, no, they could dump as much as they want in that river, then the federal government can step in and go, no, these are the laws, and this is what must be done. In the case of California, against the environmental conditions being found at gasoline producing facilities, or fuel or diesel or whatever, refineries, the EPA has standards, but the states can enact stricter ones. Now, the companies can challenge the state, but they can't ask the federal government come on, because the federal government just sets the minimum. The maximum can be set by the states, and they can be challenged. You could go in there and challenge. They have, and they've lost. And so what they did is said, hey, this is a losing proposition for us. We're moving out. And that's what happens. But the 10th Amendment does not mean that you can treat the Constitution, the constitutional laws, and federal laws as if they were on a cafeteria menu and just go, I'll take this one. No, I don't want that. And I'm going to do this. You can, like I said, states can go further, but they can't go under. 10th Amendment in those clauses were very, very poorly written, because they do, in a sense, create a paradox with Article 6. And it does become a problem. But it really isn't a problem, because if there's a state law and a federal law, the federal law is going to supersede the state law. They can be the same thing. They could have the same protection, and that's fine, because it doesn't conflict. It's not taking away from the federal government. They can make things stricter, but they can't change the basic fundamentals of what's allowed in the Constitution. And that is the Supremacy Clause. And again, if you looked at the history of the 10th Amendment, there were people in the founding fathers that said, we're afraid of an all-powerful federal government, and we want to make sure that states have autonomy. And this is why, when states said we cannot abide by this, by the Constitution, that they seceded. And we knew what happened with that. What Governor Walz has allowed to have happened is a travesty, and if states, he will be made an example of. And I don't like governments making examples of people. Just use the law. And if there isn't a law, and Congress doesn't make it a law, then the states have every right to do what they please, as long as it doesn't conflict with the Constitution. You know, because you could go as crazy as people saying, well, I want slavery back. Or, you know, Everyone must have an abortion. You can only have 2 children. Yeah, see, you don't want that either. And that's the problem, in a nutshell, about democracy. That's why we don't have a democracy. Because if you had a democracy, then it would be mob rule. And you might find 51% of the people that are voting that will do something wacky and crazy. So you have to have guardrails. And you got to fit in between those guardrails. The 10th Amendment really needs a lot of clarification, but it gets clarified through interpretation by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court can go in there and it's not the flavor of the month. They don't work that fast. But it could be something that gets relooked at 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 50 years from now. Because remember, anything that the Supreme Court rules on, that is it. That is it. There's no appeal process. You could ask the Supreme Court to revisit a ruling, but very few times, and it does happen, that the same Supreme Court looks at again what we did and go, yeah, we didn't get it right. And that does happen. It does happen. But I think in this, what they were trying to get at and didn't want to really do, our forefathers, was to use the same thing that was in the Bible. Give upon Caesar what is Caesar's, and give upon God's what is God's. I'm paraphrasing. But when Caesar wanted his taxes and allegiance, that you're not going to fight against me and stuff, all right, fine, give that to him. You're going to give your soul to God. Caesar can't ask for your soul. So this is what they were trying to do here. They were trying to get the words right to say the government, the federal government, is not the end-all, be-all. And for the most part, it was not. Though this question of the 10th Amendment has come up many, many times. And I feel that the ones being used in Minnesota, are wrong. It's you already have language in there that you're going to protect, you're going to police, you're going to uphold, and now you're not doing it. And you can say you're doing it, but you've come out and said, we're not going to do this, we're not allowing this, we're not doing that. I think they're going to find themselves in a heap of trouble. And I think a lot of the states that have taken the stance against ICE agents, what stops them from doing it with postal police? What stops them from doing it with railroad police? What stops them from doing that with the FBI? We don't want the FBI here. So it becomes a real problem. And I think that the Supreme Court will go, no, you failed to do this, and your arguments are not sound on what you're complaining about or what you think is a complaint. And I think in the end, the Attorney General will fail in this. And this will go, like I said, they'll go right to the shadow dockets. Trump will push this, immediately, because it's that dangerous. And you have people in Minnesota, you have people all over the country who are using their vehicles as weapons and feel they're justified in doing that. This is a very, very dangerous point. And we have so many people in this country that we do not know how they got here, when they got here, who they are, what their background is. And this was done purposely by the Democrats. They knew exactly what they were doing. And it's about time that the politicians get on board and all say in one voice, this is a problem. We need to address it. And we're taking these legal steps to do it. If you interfere in those legal steps, these are the consequences. And to stick to their guns. Stick to their guns. You can't have these people attacking our federal agents. Very bad. And we can't have people we don't know running around our country. I feel bad for them because the Democrats told them to come in, lied to American citizens, lied to these people. They lied to them. Gavin Newsom lied to these people. We'll welcome you. You said, no. No, you're not going to be welcomed. You're going to be deported. And Gavin Newsom lied. Bit of Rourke or whatever his name in Texas lied. Nancy Pelosi lied. Waters lied. Green lied. Biden lied. These aren't immigrants. Immigrants are people that come in using the law. Now, you say, well, they did. They came in under giving TPS. TPS is temporary protection status. Not lifelong. And now we're calling these people up and we want to know exactly, well, no, there is no more problem in Ecuador. There is no more problem in Brazil. There is no more problems in Panama. There is no more problems in Mexico. You got to go. And your children are citizens of whatever country you came from. They're not American citizens. And this is what the Supreme Court's going to rule. It's going to get very touchy because there's a lot of carve-outs that you could make for what I'm talking about. But there is limitation of federal authority that we know. There is states' responsibilities. While states must follow federal law, there are limitations on how the federal government can enforce these laws. The federal governor cannot compel state and local law enforcement to enforce federal laws. The principle of anti-commandeering doctrine. It can, the federal government can use incentives compliance by withholding federal funds from states that do not adhere to federal law. So there are federal laws, but federal government cannot compel state and local law enforcement to enforce federal laws, principles known as anti-commandeering doctrine. But if there's state and local laws that they provide protection to all visitors, to citizens, to whatever, the federal police are in their state. Now, if the state wants to say we want all those federal people out of there, they might have a very hard time in doing that. That might be a very, very hard thing for them to do. Because if you have agents from New York that live in New York and work for the federal government, if you have people living in Wisconsin, they might have to go, well, the state of Wisconsin has to, if they're from South Carolina then can challenge that. The idea is you can't ask the federal government to go after. You can't have the federal government order the local law enforcement or state law enforcement to act as a federal agent. You can't ask them to, hey, go over and arrest them for this. Unless you have a warrant for that individual, they don't have to do it. So you can't ask the state to go, well, we want you to ask everyone if they're citizens. The state can go, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to have our police do that. But they could say in motor vehicle, are you a citizen? They could do that because it's not law enforcement. But what law enforcement must do is provide protection to federal agents that are carrying out federal law. So if you want to assign police to these groups, yeah, you have to kind of do it. Now, I understand there's a cost involved in doing that, and that can certainly be negotiated with the government. But outright say we're not going to assist, or we're not going to answer a call from federal agents who are under attack, yeah, you might not want to do that, states. Because then President Trump is well within his guidelines to send in troops. And again, you can't compel a state and a local law enforcement to enforce federal law. You're not asking them to enforce federal law, you're asking them to protect federal agents, which are citizens and are in your state. And the state can turn around and go, we want these people out of there. And the federal government goes, no, we're allowed to put agents wherever we want to inside the United States and its territories. That's a supremacy clause. So the states are caught in a catch-22 situation. And they're going to press it, and they're going to lose it. And this will be just another thing for the Republicans to put up on ads going up against Democrats. And I think questions should be, do you feel that local police in any state, or in your state, New York, should be provided protection against people who are trying to harm them? And I know what these, well, they shouldn't be there. No, well, they are there and they're allowed to be there, but are you saying that they shouldn't have protection? And they'll go, they have to follow all they're following all the rules, they're doing everything, and someone drives a car at them. And we call the police. Do you think the police should answer that? Or no? Or maybe because this is an incident that you should have police on in there, but tell them you're not allowed to apprehend anyone on the command of the federal unless you actually see them committing a crime. These are not hard questions to ask. And they're not pointed questions. We're not, I'm not asking questions that can't be answered. Just answer the freaking question. Should the police be there to protect people in their state? Yes or no? Just, it's a simple yes or no. You can't go, well, if they don't, no. Because then the police don't have to protect the criminal once they're captured, and another policeman can come over and just start beating them, right? Very simple question. Are you going to do it or you're not going to do it? Yes or no? And if they say no, okay, fine, we're sending in federal troops. There you go. Done. Thank you. You can't have it both ways. The 10th Amendment does not allow for that. And those that want to not follow federal law in the true definition of it, and again, I think states have every right not to say we're going to use our police to do a federal job. I'm fine with that. You know, we're not going to do your business. I'm not going to say dirty business, but we're not going to do your business. That's your job to do it. Don't ask our police to arrest people over this. We're not going to knock on doors. We're not going to go and say, here's a list of people. We're not doing that. And that's fine. You can do that. But you cannot not protect people in your state. And you cannot not have ICE agents or the FBI or Department of Justice people or the IRS. You can't bar them from your state. If the idea that the states will say, no, they're so disruptive, they're causing riots, they're causing this. They're not causing the riots. They're not causing the riots. Your people that are causing the riots. Get your people under control. Oh, you won't do it? Then it becomes our job then to do it. And can you understand that logic? Can people get on board with that logic? As I can get on the logic that the 10th Amendment says does not compel you to use law enforcement to carry out federal government function. I'm all there. But it also, in your state laws about riots, about demonstrations, about protests, and if you fail to exercise your laws in the protection of federal employees and agencies and agents, then that then falls to Big Daddy to do. Do you understand that? Do you agree with that? Well, we wouldn't have these problems if ICE agents weren't there. ICE agents wouldn't be there if illegals weren't there. Well, how do you know illegals are here? Well, we don't. We don't know. But we have the right to see if they are. Do you understand that? It's not a hard complex. It's not a hard thing to do. The 10th Amendment is very, very badly written. It reserves to the states or the people and powers not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited to the states. So defines the boundaries of federal powers, ensuring states retain significant autonomy. So in there, it's very clear cut. But it doesn't mean the state does not have an obligation to protect those federal agents, federal property. States are obligated to do that. You must provide protection for citizens. You must provide protection for those inside your jurisdiction. And they can turn around, well, we're going to protect those people from ICE agents. You cannot interfere with federal agents. It's like interfering with the police. It's the same thing. You can't do that. There's just no way around that. You could say, well, what about, a person's Fourth Amendment rights? We all have them. That is true. But there's limitations on that too. And I said before, this becomes a major problem. And the Democrats knew this when they allowed 30 million people into this country, that would be a problem. That it's almost impossible not to step on the Fourth Amendment. And I'm a believer in all our amendments. And the the Supreme Court has said that anyone here that is authorized or not, it falls under the Fourth Amendment. There's limitations in there carved out for them too. Just like they said, you have a right to an attorney. We just don't have to pay for it. So get your own attorney. You have a right to a hearing. That's all right. We can detain you and hold you for that hearing. So really, the federal government is doing everything that they can do in that narrow scope. The problem where that scope gets so narrow is the probable cause to stop you and detain you for questioning. Well, they detained me because I spoke Spanish. They detained me because I spoke Italian. They detained me because I spoke German. Did they catch Germans? Yes. Did we catch, other than South American or non-Central and South American, have we caught people? Yeah. But again, the majority and the common denominator is language, color, But again, you see someone that has eyes that are different from us. Does that give you probable cause? That's where the Fourth Amendment gets very, very, very tricky. The police can ask for your identity, but it's in very defined reasons why. And one of them is a question, you fit the description of what? X? How is that balanced? And the Republicans are saying, not all of them, but some are saying one thing and the Democrats are saying another thing. And yeah. I would say the Fourth Amendment has more bite in it than Republicans want to admit. But what other avenue do we have than to just stop and ask people? The reasonable answer would be, would they stop me? Would they stop a woman with blonde hair, or would they stop a woman with dark skin and jet black straight hair? President Trump, I know, and I told you before, I will speak my mind, that I don't just click my heels and follow. There are questions, and there are procedures. I'll get back to you, and if you listen to my whole show, Mr. President, you'll know what I'm talking about. Not dribs and drabs. I know you're a busy man. The Fourth Amendment, very, very powerful. Your Fifth Amendment, your First Amendment. I mean, these are fundamental, Second Amendment, Third Amendment. All very, very powerful. And that's why they were in the original 10, the Bill of Rights. I think that the Walz administration over there is wrong, picking the wrong battle. I think that there's so much corruption over there that it's hard. The lines now have become so crisscrossed and over and blurred. Maybe not blurred, but does the federal government have the right to go in to a state to see who's a citizen and who's not? I say yes, they do. But how? When you allowed people to get licenses, which is fine, but states fought about not having citizenship on that license. So, what needed to be done? Well, now, to fly, you have to have, you know, that little star. And that was fought and fought and fought and fought. Because the last thing Democrats want is for you to know how many illegals are here. Because they were brought in for votes. They weren't brought in for humanitarian reasons. They were brought over here for votes. You look at the people, the Somalians that were brought into Maine and Minnesota. Why can't they go back to Somalia now? Somalia said, we're fine, we're good. It's wonderful. Why can't they go back? Well, I don't want to go back. No, you can go back and then you can apply for citizenship to come back, but, you know, the contradiction from the left. Well, they were given TPS, yeah, and we said no more TPS. Send them back. Venezuela, oh, it's wonderful, boom, send them back. Panama, send them back. The only ones that I say that really, honestly, are the Cubans. The Cubans. People from the Dominican Republic. It's bad over there. I won't say that that's not a good spot. But the TPS can't go on forever. And at some point in time, it has to be addressed. You just can't, and then you can't decide, well, we're going to give them parolee status. What's parolee status? There's no such thing. It's not allowed. Sanctuary cities. Well, yeah, there's nothing in our Constitution that says a city can't become sanctuary. But you can't hide illegal people in there. And we can't force you to use your local police to do it, but you can't stop us from coming in there and looking at that. And if you are a sanctuary city who won't comply with federal law, immigration is a law, then I can hold back funding to you. So we're not asking for your police or anyone else like that to do our job. We created ICE. That's who's going to do our job for us. Who's going to do what you have legally said you don't want to do. Okay, that's fine. But if you bar us from coming into your city, well, you just lost every dime. And we'll also apply that to the state. What stops us from doing that? Nothing stops us from doing. The Constitution says that we can do that. When I say we, it's the federal government I'm talking about. All right, with that, it's an hour of me rambling on about the 10th Amendment and what we're allowed to do. I wanted to get into this deeper, but the simple question was, do states have to follow federal laws? The answer is yes. States are required to follow federal law due to the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which establishes federal law as the supreme law of the land. And that is what a lot of people in the founding fathers were kind of, in some instances, I think it was Connecticut as usual, was a problem. Maybe Virginia, where they didn't want, whoa, states have to have some rights. And they said, yeah, what's not in the Constitution right now, have at it. And then the 10th Amendment kind of went a little bit too far and said we don't have to follow it. That we can't be compelled to follow it. We could choose to follow it, but we don't have to. And yeah, that becomes a problem too. And that's why I said that it was done because they needed this thing ratified by the founding fathers. Thus why it became the 10th Amendment, not the First Amendment. Because that kept getting pushed to the back. And finally they had enough to go, you can't get a vote on all this stuff unless we discuss this. And it was discussed, and it was saying, what was allowed and what was not allowed. All right, let me go. Everyone, have a good one. Give to a charity of your choice. Give to a food bank of your choice. Say a prayer. Prayer does work no matter what a Democrat might tell you. And everyone, have a good time. I'm going to do a follow-up show just on the 10th Amendment. Word for word and its original intent. I might do that tomorrow. All right, all. Have a good one as I fade to